Wife caught cheating. Husband's shocking revenge. Peter Schnell was a loser. Every soldier in the brigade knew that, especially himself. It wasn't that he was a bad guy, it was just that he wasn't really good at anything. He passed the Army physical fitness test, but no matter how hard he tried, he always passed it with flying colors, going into the race red-faced and puffing like a locomotive, barely ahead of time. Usually after a run, he had to step aside to throw up. Sometimes he didn't make it far enough, so most of the guys knew to leave him out of the way. There was no way he could get in good shape, no matter how hard he tried. He always reminded me of a sack of potatoes. Gun qualification meant he was the last guy on the range, barely ever taking the exam again. He had a bad haircut, a crumpled uniform, dangling bootlaces, a skewed, crumpled hat. He was that soldier. It was so deep in him that it made one secretly wonder if it was the soldier who was wrinkled, not the uniform. He was promoted to sergeant through persistence and luck. They just needed a lot more sergeants that year than usual. It happened sometimes, especially in wartime. No one really disliked him, but no one thought of him as a best friend either. He didn't hang out with the other kids. He didn't play video games or watch movies because he had a nasty migraine. He wasn't a leader of men. No one would follow him to hell. Maybe to the cafeteria, at least on pizza day, but not hell. The only noteworthy thing he ever did was climb into a burning Humvee to pull another soldier out after an IED exploded. The badly burned soldier, Private Tony Campbell, died in his arms a couple minutes later before a medical aid helicopter even got to him. The guy had also just arrived for duty. It devastated him and shattered whatever self-image Schnell had of himself. Schnell ended up getting a medal for what he did, but it was like the commanding officer said, "You really tried hard." At the award ceremony, when they talked about his attempt to comfort a dying soldier, I remember that he looked very green the whole time. It was obvious that he felt he had failed again. His marriage, if it could be called that, was an absolute disaster. He got married more or less because his overbearing mother wanted him to. She introduced him to a girl named Janice, whom she liked very much, perhaps even more than he liked himself. He kind of got caught in the middle. The marriage lasted less than 3 years, and it ended even worse than usual while we were on a business trip. We didn't get to go out much before the rumors started. Janice was seen at a club. Janice was seen with a guy in a restaurant. Janice was seen in a hotel with a guy. Janice actually moved some guy into their house. 4 different guys. Some civilian and some military. Pretty bold putting some guy in their house on base, and the brigade sergeant major had put a stop to it when he found out. There were rumors that he stopped a couple of quarries as well, but I never knew for sure. He couldn't touch her civilian boyfriends, but no soldier was beyond the reach of a really pissed-off sergeant major. Someone must have told Schnell, too. Janice found out he knew and emptied the house and their bank account, with all her combat pay and savings. By arrival day, she was long gone, and he came back with nothing. Perhaps that was the worst of it. He never got to confront her. He'd never been able to face her, tell her who she was, and get her to admit her guilt for even a moment. Maybe regain some of her self-respect. Or in Schnell's case, maybe gain some self-respect. He couldn't even turn to his family since his mother had apparently believed the story Janice had told her and practically disowned him. Or maybe Janice had just told her the truth, since none of them really seemed to think anything good of him. All he could do was sign the divorce papers left on the kitchen table. Contesting anything was pointless. 6 weeks later, the divorce was finalized. He had to pay Janice alimony for 6 months. She claimed she was broke, even claimed she had sold his car. It was rumored that one of her boyfriends drove his old car, so she probably just gave it to the boyfriend. In time-honored military tradition, a couple of guys raised some money and took him to a very expensive dance club in Atlanta. This was probably done more out of a sense of obligation than because they really liked him. Instead of getting tons of lap dances and kicking ass like he was supposed to, I heard him whining to one of the girls the whole time about how his life was going to hell. I was sure he was paying for her time while she listened. Sergeant Schnell just wasn't a winner. He never had been, and now he wouldn't get that chance. He was lying in a coffin. I attended his funeral for no particular reason. He wasn't one of my soldiers. He wasn't in my company, much less the platoon I was responsible for. I didn't know him that well. I didn't even know he was still serving in the unit. I vaguely remembered that he had been assigned to brigade headquarters some time after our return, but that was it. In fact, I hadn't seen him for months. By the time of the funeral, there weren't many left in the unit who had served with him. Such is the soldier's life, rotating to a different unit every few years. Perhaps because of this, he let his command know that he didn't want his funeral to be mandatory and that he didn't want a full military funeral. Why drag people to the funeral of someone they don't even know? He wanted it to be modest. For some reason, that bothered me. I even heard he was going to be cremated right after the funeral. Soldiers are soldiers, even Peter Schnell, and the thought of not having a full funeral made me a little uneasy. My wife was home helping my mother with some repairs, so I had too much free time on my hands. Schnell kept resurfacing on the surface of my brain. The thought kept me up until I got up that Saturday morning, put on my clothes, and went to Hill's Chapel. When I arrived, the chapel was almost empty. Only the Brigadier Sergeant Major was standing by the casket, and the colonel was looking out over the empty parking lot. The chaplain must have stepped away for a moment. I walked over to pay my respects and looked down at Schnell. He had shrunk in size, as if folded in on himself, and instead of his usual bad haircut, his head had been shaved bald. He was pale and waxy. Cancer. I turned to face the voice. Sergeant Major? Brain cancer, Sergeant. Did he always have headaches? It was inoperable brain cancer. He said it woodenly, staring at the body. I closed my eyes for a second. All that stuff we saw in there and cancer kills him? That's a good way to go. Something, almost a smile, flashed at the corner of the Sergeant Major's mouth. It was, Sergeant. It really was. I blinked. He sounded almost happy. But a Sergeant Major is never happy. Not in my experience anyway, and certainly not at a soldier's funeral. He looked me over. Your uniform looks good. I need help folding the flag. I nodded. At least I could do something. It wasn't exactly a request anyway. We talked, and I positioned myself at the back of the chapel so I could step forward at the right moment to help with the flag. At first I thought it would just be me, the brigade commander and the sergeant major, but little by little soldiers began to flock to us. Some in blue, some in military uniforms, some in civilian clothes. A lot more than I expected. I guess it hit more than just me, but still it was only a small part of the huge chapel. I was watching the clock slowly move forward when I heard a murmur rippling through the crowd. Schnell's ex-wife entered, accompanied by an older woman who must have been his mother. Janice brazenly headed straight for the chapel entrance and, without even glancing at the casket or attempting to pay her respects, made her way to the empty pew for the relatives at the very front. Just as they were about to sit down, the sergeant major came up and blocked their way. He gently but firmly guided them back to the same bench. I could see Schnell's ex-wife hissing at him, but it was pointless. This man had not achieved his rank by deferring to anyone. Looking more than annoyed, they moved back. After about 3 minutes, the world had completely lost its meaning. A long black limousine pulled up to the steps of the main chapel almost without a sound. They got out of it, walked straight up the stairs to the doors of the main chapel, and then straight down the center aisle of the chapel. Perfectly in step, perfectly in sync. It was unreal, more like a scene from a movie than something from real life. I could feel my brain glitching like a burst of radio static on the network as they passed by. A perfect set of the most attractive women I've ever seen. Not the girl next door or even she should be in a movie. They were eerily flawless and untouchable. Flawless, polished, and graceful. In a strange way, they matched each other, even though they were completely different. A redhead with blazing green eyes, partially hidden by a black veil halfway down her face. an icy platinum blonde with pale blue eyes and pale white skin, a tiny veil covering her forehead at a graceful slant. An Asian girl, probably Korean, with the same slanted veil, and a dark-skinned black girl with pale brown eyes and high cheekbones with the same slanted veil. They were wearing exactly the same dress, tight-fitting black silk, insanely short, with as much slit in the back as possible, black silk gloves and 6-inch stiletto shoes that no woman I'd ever met would even attempt to walk in. And yet they walked, perfectly synchronized, straight down the aisle. They moved with absolute grace and elegance. I admit I was distracted for a moment. The meaningless thought, "You don't see that every day," ran through my head. But then it was supplanted by admiration for the incredible sight. They headed straight for the coffin, lined up along it, heads bowed, slowly reaching for each other until they were hand in hand. After a very long moment, they silently separated from Sergeant Schnell and made their way to the front pew. The sergeant major stepped toward them, and I tensed. He was taking the funeral very seriously, and although the dresses, at least what was of the dresses, were black, they looked as if they belonged on a podium rather than in a chapel. He stopped in front of the redhead at the end of the pew and, to my complete and utter shock, saluted her respectfully and with a very formal gesture offered her a seat in the front pew. Each of the women stopped in front of him for him to address them with the words I heard in the suddenly hushed chapel. "I am sorry for your loss." Military funerals are solemn and quiet affairs, but at Peter Schnell's funeral there was an almost dead silence. Everyone in the chapel seemed to hold their breath, afraid that any sound would break the spell. The chaplain spoke, and the brigade commander gave a brief eulogy that made no mention of his family, but focused on Schnell's hope that everyone would make the most of every moment of their lives. I waited for something, anything, to explain to the 4 women bowing their heads and holding hands in the front pew, but nothing was happening. All too soon, taps blared from the speakers, and then I was helping fold the flag, stepping aside to see the sergeant major hand the flag to the brigade commander. Schnell's mother half stood up, but slowly sank back into her seat in shock as she watched him walk up to the redhead and hand her the flag. All 4 women didn't move. They sat as silent and motionless as possible throughout the ceremony. But I could see tears streaming uncontrollably, shamelessly down their faces. At the end of the funeral, all 4 women stood up as one and walked out, the blonde woman walking in front and the redhead being escorted behind her, head down and flag clutching, by the other 2 women. The moment they passed his ex-wife, I thought I saw something. For a second I was sure I saw something when the redhead's gaze shifted to the ex-wife. It was hatred, unconcealed, venomous, and absolute hatred. Then it was gone, and they walked out the chapel doors to the waiting limousine. I saw his mother and ex-wife looking after them, eyes downcast. As they walked out, I stopped to watch Janice run into the sergeant major in the parking lot. "Who was that?" He raised one eyebrow languidly. "That's really none of your business." Blushing, she stared at him. Shouldn't his mother have gotten the flag? "In this case, no. The flag goes to his family." "But she is his family." "Not according to him." "What about his benefits?" That's when it hit me that that's exactly what she wanted to know. For obvious reasons, soldiers have a pretty hefty life insurance policy, and most of them pay it out statutorily, which means the spouse or children get it. If a soldier has neither, the insurance usually goes to his mother. The sergeant major sighed tiredly and glanced at his watch. 33 minutes. I was wondering how long it would take you to get to the real reason for your appearance. She darted at him, trying to say something, but he interrupted her. "You don't need to worry about that. It's not your problem, or his mother's." He raised his voice so it wouldn't carry to the rest of the parking lot. "Have a good day." He slid into the car and started it, pulling away without even glancing in her direction. And that seemed to be the end of it. Of course, that wasn't all. I heard that Janice showed up repeatedly with her lawyer in tow, and after several encounters and much yelling and screaming, she finally left, defeated. But I heard nothing more. Brigade headquarters is always the center of rumors, but if anyone knew anything, they kept it to themselves. When I was promoted to Master Sergeant and then transferred to another base, I forgot all about it, though every now and then memories of the funeral would resurface, leaving me confused and bewildered. More than a year passed, and I received an invitation to the Sergeant Major's retirement ceremony. The base where he was serving was only a day's drive away, and I decided to go there. Once the official ceremony was over, everyone went to the reception, which was actually a big picnic with kebabs. I wandered around for a bit before he beckoned me over. "Have a seat, First Sergeant." "Sergeant Major, I assume you've heard of it." "I recommended you for the position myself. You've earned it." "Thank you." I sat down at the table with a beer, and we talked about how the new soldiers in my company were forming. We fell silent after that, and I watched him look at me for a while. He picked up his beer. "Go ahead, ask." I started to recoil, but decided there was no point. "So, what was it?" A grim frown slowly formed on his face. Schnell was confused, and he knew it. Shortly after you guys finished your tour of duty, he went to the doctor about headaches, but the doctor actually looked and found a tumor. There was nothing anyone could do but help with the pain. They gave him a little over a year and a half, no more. We moved him to brigade headquarters so he could focus on keeping himself together and getting things in order. Figured we could move him to medical hold when things got really bad. "That sucks," I shook my head. "He's just always been really lucky." He nodded slowly. "The counselors tried to talk to him, but you know how it is." I sighed. "As things go." "Yeah." And then finally one of the counselors told him he needed to talk to someone. Anyone. He couldn't think of anyone he thought would care. Certainly not with his ex or his mother. A slight smile appeared on his face. Then he remembered someone who actually listened to him. "Remember when Michaels and Diaz took him to Atlanta?" "Yeah, but it didn't look like he was having fun." "No, maybe not in the way everyone expected. But one of the girls sat down and let him tell her about how his wife cheated on him and left him. Told her about how his life had become hell." I looked at him suspiciously. "Really? Really? A redhead named Amber. So he goes back to the club, finds her, and sits with her again. It all just comes out, all of it. The cancer, the loneliness, everything. He told her he wished he had the courage to end it. Just end it all." He leaned back, taking a sip of his beer. "I don't know which one of them came up with the idea. It doesn't matter, but they made a deal. He'll marry her, make her the beneficiary of his military and civilian insurance policies, and she'll make whatever he has left worth living for." I had to chuckle. "Sounds like she could do that." "You bet she could. He had a little over $1 million in insurance. You can do a lot with $1 million on the line. She talked 3 of her friends into doing it with her. The other 3 girls who were at the funeral. Tasha, Lynn, and Sienna." "Professionals?" "Yeah, dancers, like Amber." He pulled out his phone and put it on the table. "But they really did it. He was never alone. 1 or more of them were with him all the time. Usually 3. Amber had Sienna, the blonde, keep a schedule just to be absolutely sure." The sergeant major shook his head. "She's got everything under control. She'd be a very good operations officer." He tapped his phone and motioned it so I could see him flipping through the photos. A wedding picture of Peter Schnell in a tuxedo and his new wife in a wedding dress that must have been taken at Frederick's of Hollywood. Apparently, the 3 bridesmaids' dresses were also imported from there. The smiles looked quite real. I was sure his smile was too. There were pictures of him with his new wife in Cancun on their honeymoon. Only they weren't alone. They had 3 bridesmaids with them. The women were dressed in swimsuits that looked like they were made of wishbone and thread, but not much else. They've spent this past year doing everything they could think of. He flipped through the photos. They were at restaurants, baseball games, the beach, hiking, and camping. In most of the pictures, the women were wearing exactly enough clothes to keep them from being arrested. In the camping photos, it was just long flannel shirts, boots. Looks like he got his money's worth. Looks like it. I think Tasha, Lynn, and Sienna got more than they bargained for. I don't know how they felt about it in the beginning, but by the end, when he was in the hospital, they were all over it. They held his hands, read to him, sang to him, and talked to him until the very end. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, one of them was always there for him. And when things got really close, they were there all the time. Then it definitely wasn't about the money anymore. He'd never know if they'd left. He studied the table for a moment. I was there. They really loved him. I looked closely at the photos and tried not to notice the startling amount of exposed skin. Lynn, touching his arm and leaning her head against him, sitting by the fire. Tasha pressing her forehead against his at a baseball game, both clearly laughing almost to the point of tears. Sienna, hugging him as they swam in the water, both half asleep and dreamy. Amber was always by his side, watching him with care and attention, taking his laughter as her own, holding his hand at every opportunity, not the slightest drop of jealousy. Schnell sent me 2 albums of photos, probably 200 pictures, maybe more. One of the albums is at my headquarters. I don't know what to do with it. What happened to the second one? He told me to do whatever I wanted with it. I gave it to my ex-wife. She finally stopped arguing about insurance after I gave it to her. A lot of the pictures are more, graphic than the ones on my phone. They clearly show they did everything they could to make him forget she existed. That's a very nice way of putting it. Yeah, it was, wasn't it? He looked up at the night sky. I don't think it was about the money. It wasn't for Amber anyway. Really? I was worried when Schnell told me about the deal. I knew I had a bomb on my hands, and I wasn't going to let that happen. So I did a little research, found something odd, and decided to leave it at that. I was right. I only got her a few weeks ago. She was 3 months pregnant at the funeral. He displayed the photo on the screen of his phone. In the photo, Amber, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, smiling and holding a baby in her arms, sat next to a picture of Schnell in full ceremonial attire. The child's resemblance to Schnell was unmistakable. I blinked. What is this nonsense? Schnell never really got into things and connected the dots. He was too distracted to pay attention to anything but the fact that she really seemed to be the only one who cared at first. And then he started to get distracted. I think I can understand that. Diaz admitted that Amber paid him to get Schnell in her club in Atlanta that first time. I didn't say anything, and I'm sure Schnell never realized anything. She didn't want him to know. Know what? He pointed to the shelf behind him where another framed photo of another soldier stood. She had a twin brother. Her last name was Campbell. The end. Subscribe to my channel. Thank you.